Imagine someone throwing a spear at you thousands of years before anyone had invented armor. What stood between that spear and your body? The answer was not metal. In many cases, it was almost nothing. Yet somehow, humans survived for thousands of years before the first true armor ever appeared. How? The answer has almost nothing to do with what they wore. It has everything to do with how they fought, where they stood, and the surprisingly clever ways they turned the world around them into protection. The first thing ancient humans learned was not how to make armor. It was how to avoid getting hit in the first place. Long before people covered their bodies with leather or metal, they had already figured out a much simpler rule. The farther you stayed from danger, the better your chances of staying alive. That may sound obvious today, but thousands of years ago, it changed everything. Early humans were not the fastest animals. They were not the strongest either. A wild boar could charge faster. A cave lion was far more powerful. Even another human with a sharp stone spear could be deadly at close range. So instead of fighting up close whenever possible, they changed the distance. Archaeologists have found wooden spears at the Schöningen site in Germany that are around 300,000 years old. They were carefully balanced, making them effective throwing weapons as well as hunting spears. Instead of standing face to face with danger, early humans could strike from several meters away while keeping themselves safer. But distance was only part of the strategy. Ancient humans also chose where they fought. High ground made it harder for an attacker to reach them. Large rocks, fallen trees, and narrow paths could slow both animals and enemies. Even something as simple as standing with the sun behind them could make it harder for an opponent to see clearly. In other words, before humans learned to protect their bodies, they learned to use the world around them as protection. That worked surprisingly well for thousands of years. But no matter how careful you were, one problem never went away. Eventually, someone got close. And when that happened, distance alone could no longer save you. So if staying out of reach wasn't always possible, what was the very first thing humans put between themselves and a deadly weapon? When people think about protection in the ancient world, they usually picture armor first, but that is not what happened. Long before humans wrapped themselves in leather or covered their bodies with bronze, they learned something much simpler. If you could not stop a spear, you could at least stop it from reaching your body. The shield was one of the oldest defensive tools ever invented. The earliest shields were probably made from wood, woven branches, or stretched animal hides. These materials rarely survive for thousands of years, so archaeologists have found very few complete examples. But ancient artwork, preserved fragments, and later discoveries all point to the same idea. Early shields appeared long before metal body armor became common. Unlike armor, a shield had one huge advantage. It protected only where danger was coming from, but it could move. A hunter could raise it against a charging animal. A warrior could shift it to block a spear or an arrow. If the attack came from another direction, the shield moved with the hand instead of covering the entire body all the time. That made it surprisingly effective. There is also a common myth that ancient shields were heavy slabs of wood that quickly exhausted the person carrying them. The reality was very different. Many early shields were designed to be as light as possible while still absorbing the force of a strike. A shield that was too heavy became a danger to its owner. Speed often mattered more than thickness. Even so, a shield had obvious limits. It could only protect the part of your body it covered. Your legs, your back, and your sides were still exposed. If you dropped it for even a moment, you had almost nothing standing between you and a sharpened spear. That forced ancient humans to think beyond simply carrying protection. They needed to make themselves harder to hit in the first place. And surprisingly, one of the next forms of protection was something they were already wearing every single day. What ancient humans wore was never meant to be armor, but it may have saved more lives than they ever realized. The first clothes were never meant to stop weapons. They existed for a much simpler reason: to keep people warm. As humans spread into colder parts of Europe and Asia, surviving the weather became just as important as surviving predators. Animal hides, thick fur, and stitched skins helped trap body heat during freezing winters. But over time, people noticed something unexpected. Those same layers could also soften a blow. A sharp stone might tear through a single layer of skin, but several thick hides made the cut less severe. A glancing strike from a wooden club could lose much of its force before reaching the body. Even though these clothes were never designed as armor, they offered more protection than bare skin. This has led to a common misconception. Many people imagine prehistoric humans walking around in leather armor. In reality, there is no evidence that the earliest animal hide clothing was made specifically for combat. It was survival clothing first. Any protection it provided against weapons was an added benefit, not the original purpose. Archaeologists know that humans were processing animal hides at least 120,000 years ago. Bone tools discovered in Morocco show that people had already developed specialized techniques for scraping and preparing hides. That means the knowledge to make thick, fitted clothing existed tens of thousands of years before true armor appeared. But clothing had limits. It could reduce cuts and soften weaker blows, yet it could not reliably stop a spear driven with full force or an arrow fired from a distance. As hunting tools became sharper and conflicts between human groups became more dangerous, people needed something that did more than simply cushion an impact. Instead of wearing thicker and thicker clothing, they began looking beyond what they carried on their bodies. The safest protection was often the ground beneath their feet, the rocks beside them, and the landscape itself, because sometimes the best defense was choosing a place where an attack could barely reach you at all. Long before people built castles or city walls, they were already using the land itself as a shield. Ancient humans quickly learned that where you stood could be just as important as what you carried. A person fighting in an open field was exposed from every direction, but someone standing on a rocky slope, inside a narrow cave entrance, or behind a line of large boulders was much harder to reach. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric campsites suggests that people often chose locations with natural advantages. Many settlements were built near cliffs, riverbanks, or elevated ground, places that were easier to defend and harder for both predators and rival groups to approach unnoticed. Fire became another powerful form of protection. Most people think ancient humans only used fire for cooking or staying warm. In reality, it also helped keep dangerous animals away from camps at night. A ring of burning wood created light, smoke, and heat that many predators preferred to avoid. Even when fire did not physically stop an attack, it made surprise attacks far less likely. The landscape itself could also become a weapon. A narrow path forced attackers to approach one or two at a time. Loose rocks on a hillside could slow anyone trying to climb. Thick forests provided places to hide, escape, or launch an ambush. Ancient humans were not simply surviving in nature. They were learning how to make nature fight alongside them. This is one reason early humans often defeated stronger animals, despite having weaker bodies. They rarely relied on strength alone. They relied on planning, positioning, and patience, but every advantage the landscape offered disappeared the moment people had to leave it behind. Hunters traveled, families migrated, rival groups crossed open ground in search of food and water. And once there were no cliffs, no caves, and no trees to hide behind, survival depended less on the place around you and far more on the people standing beside you. For most of human history, the safest place was not behind a shield. It was inside a group. One person could only watch in one direction. A group could watch in every direction at once. While some searched for food, others stayed alert for danger. If someone spotted a predator or a rival group, they could warn everyone else before it was too late. This simple advantage changed the odds of survival. Anthropologists believe that cooperation became one of humanity's greatest survival tools. Early humans shared food, cared for injured members, and defended one another. A lone hunter was an easy target. A group that worked together was a much harder challenge. Over time, people became even more organized. Instead of everyone reacting on their own, they started moving together. Hunters surrounded large animals from different sides. During conflicts with rival groups, people stood shoulder to shoulder instead of fighting as individuals. Even without armor, several people protecting one another were far more difficult to defeat than a single person standing alone. This may be the biggest reason humans survived in a world filled with larger, faster, and stronger animals. Intelligence mattered, but shared intelligence mattered even more. Every generation passed down better hunting techniques, safer camp locations, and smarter ways to deal with danger. Survival was no longer just about strength. It became something that entire communities learned together. But as human populations grew, another problem appeared. Groups became larger. Villages became permanent. Valuable land and food had to be defended. Fights were no longer quick encounters between small bands of people. They slowly turned into organized battles, and the old ways of staying alive were no longer enough. For the first time, humans began looking for protection they could wear, and that search would eventually lead to the invention of armor. For thousands of years, ancient humans survived without armor because they rarely depended on just one form of protection. They kept their distance. They used shields. They wore thick animal hides. They fought from high ground. They relied on fire, the landscape, and the people around them. For a long time, that was enough, but human life was changing. Around 12,000 years ago, many communities began settling in one place instead of constantly moving. Villages grew larger, food could be stored, land became valuable. And once people had something worth defending, conflicts became more frequent and far more deadly. Weapons changed too. Stone spear points became sharper, bows became more common. Later came copper and bronze weapons that could cut deeper and strike harder than anything before. The old ways of staying safe could no longer guarantee survival. That was the moment humans began asking a completely different question. Instead of, how do I avoid being hit? They started asking, how do I survive after I am hit? The answer eventually became the first true armor. At first, it was hardened leather. In some regions, it was carefully shaped animal bone. Centuries later came bronze, iron, and everything that followed. Armor was never humanity's first line of defense. It was the last solution to a problem that had been growing for thousands of years. And in many ways, that lesson has never changed. Today, soldiers wear advanced body armor made from ceramic plates and high-strength fibers. Construction workers wear hard hats. Cyclists wear helmets. Even a simple seatbelt follows the same idea. Put something between the human body and danger. The materials are different, but the goal is exactly the same as it was thousands of years ago. Humans did not survive because they invented armor first. They survived long enough to invent it. If you enjoyed discovering how our ancestors stayed alive long before armor existed, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more ancient human mysteries waiting to be uncovered.